What's up, YouTube? It's your boy Anthony Simmons, and just in case anybody out there doesn't know, you're watching Higher Heights. Yes, Higher Heights, the only channel that stands for the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Now, you've seen the title and you've seen the thumbnail. If you clicked on it, then you know what you're here for. But if you don't, we're here to talk about the PTSD of black people in America. Yes, I do believe black people in America are suffering from PTSD. And to those who do not want to have this conversation or hear these things, it's going to sound like a bunch of but I brought this to the table because in a society where we're willing to talk about everything else, including sexuality, politics, religion, and all of those things, I think this is one subject that Americans are afraid to address and talk about, and I wanted to bring it to the forefront and the table today. Now, I'm going to be talking about today as a result of the PTSD that I believe black Americans suffer from, how it breaks down the black family structure, how we have poor financial literacy, how we're struggling in black leadership, and all of these things, spirituality, sexuality, and all of this is as a result and a direct effect of struggling from PTSD. If you'll stay with me and pray with me, I promise you, you're gonna get something out of this episode. Before we get into this, if you're new to the channel, let me let you know what you can do to the channel. I need you to go ahead and do what you came to do. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the notification bell and leave in the comments. I like to hear your comments. I like to hear y'all response. And if I have time, you know I'm going to get back with you. With all of that being said, let's get to it. Now, the first issue that I want to talk about is this concept of colorism that America has created. Now, the definition of colorism is the prejudice or discrimination against those with a dark skin tone, typically amongst people of the same ethnic or racial group. Now, some of you may be asking, what does this have to do specifically with this topic? I'm glad you asked, because here in America, we're the only people who separate and classify people according to the lightness or darkness of their skin complexion. And in most cases, this determines how we perceive or treat individuals as we deal with them. You see, here in America, no one can be seen simply as a man or as a woman. See, in America, we have this need to classify, divide, and separate in different ways and categories, such as politically, financially, sexually, religiously, or in this case, in the topic of the day, racially. So today we're going to get to the root cause of why is it so important that we call people, men and women, by white, black, brown, or yellow, light-skinned or dark-skinned. In order to understand this level of thinking, you really need to delve deep into the psyche of the European culture, white America's obsession with asserting itself as a dominant race. And yes, I know there are some of you out there who are probably watching this video saying, Higher Heights, you're reading too much into this. Like, describing people as a color is just a simple form of describing somebody. And if you choose to feel that way, that is your right. But I'm choosing today to take a look at the effects and the connotation that comes along with choosing to use these certain words to describe people. Take the word white, for example. The connotation that comes along with it is pure, innocence, simplicity, and cleanliness. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like something you'd want to be associated with, right? Now let's move over to the next word, black. When you think about the word black and the connotations that come with it is death, darkness, decay, and evil deeds. And this is the word they use to describe black people in America. Death, darkness, decay, and evil deeds. Now, who would want to be associated with the word yellow if it's going to come with that kind of connotation? If you ever watch any old Western movies or Bonanza, for example, when they would call a person yellow, that means you were a coward or they were degrading you as a man and actually making you seem less than a man if they called you yellow. And this is how we usually describe Chinese people. Now, if you're following me, I hope you can see where I'm going with this. You see, on surface level, what seems perfectly innocent to the naked eye, when we choose to just dig a little bit deeper, we can see the root cause of a much deeper and darker undertone. You see, psychiatrists like to do this little thing with their patients called word association. It's where I say a word to you and you say the first thing that pops in your mind, usually something that you associate with that word. And while it is true that every individual may not have the same thoughts when it comes to words separately, I think it's safe to say that we all can agree that some words carry a universal feeling or thought with them. Example, usually when you see a group of people dressed in all black, you associate that with that they may be going to a funeral, or maybe they just came from a funeral. When you see a group of people dressed in all black, right? With that being said, it's hard to ignore that this, along with the job America has done with the perception of people of color, has done huge amounts of damage in the way that we are perceived as people, and has created deep psychological scars that permeate throughout our culture and society. With that being said, we just getting into this, but I need y'all to go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. I need y'all to run them likes up, support your boy, because we almost to a very present goal and real mark, and I need y'all to help me reach that. With that being said, I'm greatly appreciative to everybody who's supporting. Now on to the video. Now that we discussed colorism, which is one of the topics that's at the base of this PTSD issue, we can move into some more reasons why I feel like Black America is suffering from PTSD. Now follow me. Look, you got to understand me that as we continue to evolve and progress as a society, that there are many walls and layers and levels to peel back and break down in order to get to this idealistic society that we're trying to get to, where everybody's loved, respected, and honored and appreciated. You know, just being generally respectful as human beings as a whole. And we know that at the basis of all change, at its most minute form, is communication. This is at the root of every piece of change. The first thing that has to happen is a honest conversation, communication. Yes, the one thing that God gave men that separates us from any other creation on this earth, the ability to cognitively think a thought, to relay that thought through communication and articulate with each other, and to be able to, i.e., manifest those thoughts into a reality. That's the one thing God did for us that separates us from the animals and any other thing that he created. And nothing pains me more than the fact that we are literally able to sit down and have a serious conversation about everything in America, a serious conversation about everything but the degradation of Black people. I mean, think about it. When it comes to religion, political parties, sexuality, and gender equality, everyone is so willing to sit down and open up and have a genuinely honest conversation about these issues. But when it comes to having an honest conversation about people of color and the things that they suffer from, it's hard to sit down and have somebody have an honest, open dialogue with a singular focus. And this is created and caused so much damage. Every time there's a conversation about the traumatization of Black people in America, you're going to have one of a few things happen. You're going to have some deflection, dismissiveness, or inclusion. Deflection, dismissiveness, or inclusion. What I mean by deflection is they're going to always deflect and talk about how Black people need to be accountable for them own selves and have to stand up and take pride in them own selves and all that good stuff, which is true. But when we're talking about the traumatic things that have happened to Black people, that has nothing to do, one has nothing to do with the other. Yes, indeed, we live in an age where Black people can have accountability moving forward with the things that have happened to them, but this still does not deal with the residual effects that we have suffered in this country. So deflection. How about dismissiveness? Oh, that was forever ago. Y'all need to let that go. It wasn't us. It was our ancestors. We didn't have any part in that. Dismissiveness. Or inclusion. No matter what, there's always somebody trying to hang on or tag along with the Black struggle in America, namely the LGBTQ, who has attached itself with its sexual preference rights and has made some kind of way tagged along with Black human rights and made that all mesh together. We always have to be all inclusive of everybody. When we said Black Lives Matter, we also had to include that white lives matter, even though we know these things. But the fact that we have to express that our lives matter is because we are being torn down, killed, and ran down like dogs in the streets every day because our life has no value. But when we want to talk about the fact that our life has no value, we must make sure that we apologize and that we also include everybody along the way. All I'm saying is no matter what, black people in America cannot have a conversation with a singular focus on the effects and long-term ramifications of slavery in America and the injustice that it caused and all the things that come along with it. We can never singularly focus on that conversation. It's funny because these days, we have people at schools fighting for people to become more accepting of the LGBTQIA plus LMNOP community and indoctrinating and teaching and its ability to indoctrinate and teach children to normalize same-sex marriages. And I mean, they want to start with ages as young as kindergartner. I mean, to start at that age to even think about that, and these kids aren't even thinking about sex, period, before you to want to indoctrinate them at a young age, not giving them a choice to choose what they want to be in life. They don't even know if they want to like anybody at that age. And for you to be up at the school fighting about this is crazy. So you mean to tell me that it's that important for you to push your agenda of your sexuality and your identity model on these innocent children, that we are literally storming the school and protesting about this group of people and who they choose to be sexually active with and how they want to play dress up, and we have yet to address the issue of how schools have not properly taught children about the real history of African America and how they would rather just whitewash the history books or erase the fact that slavery ever happened rather than to give the honest, real truth about it. I mean, even when I think about it, when I grew up and they would teach about slavery, they talked about it as if it was just a way of life, a thing that happened. And they didn't really get into and delve into the evils of the people who committed this thing. They just talked about it as if it was a thing that happened, and then we move on. I always thought that I just started out a slave. I popped out my mama and my people started as slaves. I knew nothing about the true history, and we're not making an uproar about that, but we want to make a fuss about being able to teach somebody that you can have two mommies or two daddies, and that's totally normal. And look, I get it. When it comes to this subject, I view white America like the husband or the wife that has cheated on each other, but they still live together, so they don't want to take accountability or want anybody to ever bring up what they've done. Sure, I know I made a mistake, but I don't want to hear about it for the rest of my life, right? You know how they don't want to take accountability or for you to constantly bring it up because it's going to remind them of the evil that they created. Yeah, that's kind of how I view them in this situation. I mean, think about it. Who would want to be reminded about how you stole people or purchased people or kidnapped people? Robbed them of their culture, identity, self-respect, and dignity, had sex with their men, had sex with their women. And when their women had sex with our men, if they got caught, all they did is said, hey, well, I didn't do this by choice. He forced me to do it. And the men would come in and have sex with our women and make the men go out and work in the fields, or even worse, made you sit there and watch, take our kids and beat them and whip them and murder them. Who would want to be reminded of these types of things? And yet who would want to be reminded that they murdered us by the hundreds of thousands? And not only did they murder us by hundreds of thousands, they took part in taking pictures of hanging bodies being lynched, and they commemorated the moment and celebrated the moment by taking these pictures with their kids involved. And this is how they celebrated their dealings and their evil doings. Who would want to be reminded of this every day? Nobody would want to be reminded of this kind of evil and hatred that they know lies deep within them. And then, to top it all off, when you so-called set them free after 400 plus years of slavery, there was no counseling, there was no mental help, there was none of these things around at the time. So, while not to make light of the condition that we're in today, where people are starting to take mental health seriously, which we should, don't you think that a race of people who were mentally tormented, physically abused, displaced, despondent, culturally erased and whitewashed and brainwashed should have a time of healing, should have a time of addressing the effects that their culture has been through. Now, when I mention this part about Jewish people, I don't want you to think that I'm underplaying it or downplaying it in any kind of way. I'm not undertoning it. We always have to be apologetic when we use things as examples, as our culture is. But when you look at the 12-year span that the Jewish people had to go through the things with Hitler, you have to realize that everybody recognizes how traumatic, how devastating that was. And I'm not trying to downplay it, because anytime a group of people is discriminated against, is murdered and done that way in this world, which has happened over the course of a history of time, it needs to be addressed. It needs to be taken serious. But think about it, 12 years versus 400 plus years. And we can't have an honest conversation about how our people are suffering from PTSD. So again, there was no therapy, no healing, no reparation. It's just move forward as a group of people with no time to heal from all of these scars that you have. And there's a reason that I put set free in quotation marks, because I believe Black America's biggest mistake and the worst thing that we could ever buy into was fighting to be equal instead of fighting to be free. Because when we fought to be equal, it gave people a right to tell us what equality was. It gave them a right to indoctrinate us into their educational system, into their justice system. And it gave them the right to take everything that we innovate, everything that we invent. It gave them the right to use us in their wars, even though we might not want to have interest in fighting in their wars. But because we're the stepchild in your country, if they have a war, we have a war. If we innovate heart surgery, it's their innovation as America. If we invent something, it's America's invention. You understand what I'm saying? Because we fought to be equal. We did not fight to be free. And that's why I put set free in quotation marks, because as long as we don't have our own nation, we'll always be looked at as second-class citizens. We'll always be looked at as less than. We'll always be looked at as the stepchild in America. Now, once again, I highlighted the point earlier that we live in a world where mental health is becoming increasingly more important and more highlighted and looked upon. And I'm not downplaying it. I'm merely trying to highlight the fact that if somebody goes through a traumatic event, like you can have PTSD from having a baby, you can have PTSD from living in the hood, you can have PTSD from going through any kind of traumatic event in your life, and you might need somebody to talk to. You might need some therapy. But how much more does an entire race or group of people need that same healing time, that same therapy, that same mental health when it comes to dealing with 400 plus years of slavery? And we have not had that real conversation yet. We refuse to have that real conversation yet. We just tell you to get up and pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And we all know that Black people are notorious for not wanting anybody to talk to, who are not believing in going to therapists. It's getting better now, and more people are starting to buy into that. But as a whole, as a country, we need healing. And the country that is responsible for this travesty needs to address this in a serious dialogue and conversation. But instead of giving us a serious conversation, we are told to forget about it. Don't talk about it. Move on. And you see, that's easy to say when you're the pedophile, when you're the molester, when you're the murderer, when you're the one who slapped somebody and didn't have to turn your cheek. It's easy for you to say, oh, just forget about it. That was yesterday. That's in the past. It's easy for you to say when you have benefited off the backs of these people, when you have degraded another group of people, when you continue to slander and misappropriate the way that you see us. It's easy for you to say these things. So you see, when I talk about the effects of PTSD and slavery on Black people in America, the roots run so deep that it cannot easily be swept under the rug. This is why we struggle with our Black families, and the Black family structure is broken down, and the numbers are disproportionate when you talk about the man out of the home, the single woman raising kids. This is why the numbers are disproportionate when it comes to generational wealth and financial literacy. This is why our Black leadership no longer exists. And we used to have the Malcolm X's and the Martin Luther Kings and the Huey P. Newtons and all of those kind of people, and the Rosa Parks and we had all of those kind of people, but those have disintegrated. And they've turned into people with their own agenda, i.e. Black Lives Matter movement, who has now declared bankruptcy, and all the donations that they got, because we got that mentality of once we get to a certain position, it's all about us. And where did we learn that from? We learned that from America. We learned that in America, that I got my slice of the pie, so forget the rest of those people. So those are the leaders and what they transitioned to in our lives. And now we adopted the other American culture of adopting entertainers and athletes to be our leaders. And who are these people to speak on the struggle when they no longer live the struggle anymore, and they no longer care or desire to know what it means like to be in that struggle, and they think they're above the struggle until they find out they're not no longer. All of these structures are broke down. All of these structures are diminishing in the black community, and that's because we are suffering from PTSD, which we really need a conversation about. Listen, if you haven't hit the like, subscribe, notification bell, I need you to do that. Also, tell me what you think in the comments. What do you think in the comments? Do you think that America needs to have a serious conversation, not about reparations, not about any of this bull jive that we see them talking about? What do you think about what I'm saying? Having a serious conversation about the effects of slavery, about what needs to be done moving forward as far as seeing the black person of color as a real human being. How can we change things to represent us better in this country so that we don't have to feel like second-class citizens, so that we don't have to feel despondent and displaced from our culture? What can we do to change this? I want to hear about this in the comments. Until next time, y'all be blessed.